Hello, ladies and gentlemen. James here. I'm going to show a very interesting video, and this is from a channel. Um, it's a short version. I'm gonna have two short versions of this channel. One is from this is called We Woke Channel, and it's gonna give you the definition of the N word and their version how it was put into a cartoon. But I'm not, and I'm going to kind of show you and kind of show you bits and pieces of try not to get a copyright strike without get some amount of time. But I found it very interesting. Also, I'm going to put it into to show you this other film constructed around racism. What is the definition of racism? So hopefully that this would be a really interesting point. But I got it off. Uh, yeah, I listen to this guy quite a bit. His name is Pastor Kelly, and I liked the video. And so I'm going to go ahead and play it and see we go from there. All right, then, sit back and listen, enjoy. That's Dr. Claude Anderson.
It's prejudice, it's bigotry, it's hatred. No, it's not. Racism is a competitive relationship between groups of people that are competing for the ownership and control of wealth and resources and power. That's what racism is. Racism is a group phenomenon. Racism is a team sport. You cannot be participating in racism if you don't play as a team. You can't correct it. You're not even in the game. Racism is like football, basketball, and baseball. You play as a team or you lose. And I got all these so-called educated blacks in America on TV, heading up civil rights organizations, getting elected to public office. Don't you understand what racism is? That's why they don't do anything. They go there and tell you, well, I'm in a public office, I'm a mayor or governor. My thing is make sure everybody get along. That's not effective racism. Nobody asked you to get elected to office and make people get along. Now, racism never existed on the earth until the 1400s. Never had it. There was no such thing as racism. You had people, for instance, who had practiced various forms of discrimination. We've had slavery. But to be enslaved prior to the 1400s for only three reasons. Either you were a victim of a religious persecution, or you had some indebtedness that was enslaved, or you were a prisoner of war. Those are the only three reasons you could be enslaved until the 1400s. About 1442, when Magellan, he went around, Henry the Navigator rather, went around the coast of Africa and picked up about 16 blacks and brought them back in 1442 and gave them to the Pope as gifts. And those slaves worked around the Vatican in Italy from 1442 and about 1488. It became a good thing to have all these blacks working free around the Vatican and in the Pope's space. No labor to be paid for. Other people wanted those advantages. So Pope Pius put out a public edict. Pope Innocent put out a public edict saying, look, if you want some slaves, go get some, but get black folk. He put out a public edict saying, if you're going to enslave anybody, enslave black people. And once that hit, all of a sudden everybody got interested in getting slaves. And that started the whole movement in 1488. drugs and some other thing. What was his name? Columbus. Y'all remember that guy? Now he came over here and he supposedly discovered America about 7 years after the Pope had put out his edict using blacks as slaves. Now all of a sudden he goes back to Europe. Everybody, a race started. All these countries got into a race to develop the Western world that Columbus said he had discovered. And what was the race about? They wanted to colonize and get resources, wealth, gold, silver, and cash crops from the West. Because they never knew that the Americas existed. People in Europe never knew that there was a North America, Central America, and a South America. They got into a contest to explore it and to find it and profit from it. And at that time, prior to that, thank you, sir. Prior to that, can you all hear me as well without this?
Nature, not nature. Doesn't have a J or a J sound to it. Right? The Latin nature, adjective, 1594.
so they all said, well, how are we going to do it? They said, we need a labor class. So they all rushed down and picked up the Pope's edict and started grabbing blacks off the west coast of Africa. He was picking those blacks up on average about $25 a piece. And they started setting up, so they want a 1,500% return their money. They started selling them for $400-something a piece. And so they started shipping blacks all into this country in Latin America, Central America, to put them to work as a labor class. Now the countries that started that race, it started with Arabs. Arabs were the first ones that started enslaving black folk. I don't know if you all know that or not. Arabs were the first ones that started enslaving black folk, and Arabs have been enslaving black folk now for 1,300 years. Arabs first started enslaving blacks in 765 AD when they marched into Africa in what they called in search of the 3 G's, God, glory, and gold. They pursued Africa until the 12th century when they overtook Timbuktu, and Timbuktu fell, then they started dominating Africa. But Arabs were the first ones. Portuguese were the second ones. Hispanics were the third ones. Then the Germans and the Danes. Then the French. Then the English. The Norwegians on down the line. Then lastly was the American Indians. Everybody's enslaved black folk. And that's what a race was. A contest started to develop the Western world. The rule was he who gets there first with the most slaves and make the most money will be the most powerful nation on earth. And the race began. Everybody was in the race to use black folk except black folk. And began shipping blacks into America. And they shipped black folk in. They justified it initially by saying that it was an economic issue. Everybody knew it was an economic issue. It stayed an economic issue all the way from the 1500s up to the 1700s. In the 1700s, when the evangelical movement moved to this country, they switched enslaving black folk to make it a religious issue. Why? Because King James then wrote, when England took over the slave trade as the biggest one and started leading the slave trades and started winning the race, King James rewrote the Bible, called the King James Version. And he even had, what's his name now? What's the writer? Shakespeare and the rest of them, right? All of them rewrote the Bible. And they rewrote the Bible, then since England was the dominating country for slaves, all the slave states were mandated to use scriptures to justify enslaving the black people. So religion then became a means of codifying slavery. And the slave owners started teaching black folk that when you hear me talk about the master and the slave in the Bible, on earth, it's the white man is the master and you're the slave. And you're mandated to do three things. 1, to accept your station in life. 2, to be humble and obedient. 3, to work hard, don't steal and don't lie. And lastly, to look for pie in the sky after death. And that stayed true up until about 1880. At that time, religion was the justification for slavery. This is important for you now. Slavery then moved from being an economic issue to a religious issue. It stayed a religious issue up until about 1859, again, on the eve of the Civil War. On the eve of the Civil War, a guy named Charles Darwin. Remember Charles Darwin? He wrote a book called The Survival of the Species, or The Survival of the Fittest. And what he's been doing, along with a lot of other pseudoscientists, was trying to connect a linkage between the lowest and the highest in life. What he was saying is that, is an amoeba that's that small, is it greater or smaller than the elephants that's big? Is a blade of grass lower in the chain than a tree? And they kept setting up these vertical systems. They call them genuses and species, going from the lowest of everything to the highest. But by that time, the white society had successfully redistributed by 1860 almost 97% of all the wealth Charles Darwin wrote his book. And they looked around and said, look, they're whites, not as human beings. We worked out the relationship between
chapter 11, verse 10. Explains the genealogy of Shem. Shem was a black man in Africa. And to repeat this fact, Genesis 14, verse 13. Abraham steps on the scene. Being a descendant of Shem, which is a fact, means Abraham too was black. Abraham born in the city of a black man called Nimrod, grandson of Ham. Ham had 4 sons. One was named Canaan. Here, let me just explain. Abraham, Isaac was the Jacob had 12 sons, for real, and these were the children of Israel. According to Genesis chapter 10, these were the
black was in a ditch. The race was over. When the race was over and blacks had nothing and whites had everything, the race ended. And what the society did then, they took the word race, R-A-C-E. They scratched the E off the end of race and stuck a suffix called ISM. ISM is a suffix which means keep the prevailing conditions, let nothing change. And that's where racism came from. The race was over. Whites won, they had everything. They took the E off the end of the word, stuck ISM, that's what racism is. Racism is a competitive relationship starting out to get wealth and resources and power. But what they teach you now is that racism has something to do with liking people, getting along with people. That's not racism. When I ask people, I said, do you know what racism is? They say it's prejudice. You cannot eradicate prejudice. Everybody got a right to be prejudiced. All prejudice is that you got a preconceived judgment or feeling about something based on previous experience. Right now, because of ice cream, I love burgundy cherry ice cream. So guess what? I'm prejudiced towards burgundy cherry ice cream. So now when I want some ice cream, I exercise my prejudice. I say, I'm going to get me some ice cream, some burgundy cherry ice cream, and that's what I'm prejudiced for. Now I say, where am I going to get it from? I've got a lot of ice cream in a lot of stores, half of one worth a quarter. That's what Baskin Robbins had the best. So now I'm biased towards which ice cream parlor? Baskin Robbins. I'm biased to go there to exercise my prejudice. Now when I get into Baskin Robbins, I'll walk up and down the counter, look at all the cherry mocha, the black chocolate, chocolate rock, peppermint juicy fruit. I look at all that ice cream. And then guess what I'm doing now? Now I am discriminating. I'm discriminating against what kind of ice cream I want to satisfy my prejudice. And so I'll pick, and I go down and I say, burgundy cherry, that's it. Now, that prejudice, that bias, that discrimination has nothing in the world to do with racism. Don't let people keep tricking you by comparing prejudice and discrimination with racism. That's why all the gays jump and say, well, we're just as bad off as black folk. They're prejudiced against us. That has nothing to do with racism. You tell people, I don't care about your being prejudiced or discriminated. That doesn't bother me as a black person. I'm scared of racism. I'm scared of the fact that you're going to own and control everything. That's what you should be working on.
Right.
So everything you do in this city must go after eradicating racism. Not prejudice, not bigotry, not getting along with people, not bias. You must try to redistribute some wealth and resources back in the hands of black folk as quickly as you can. That's what you need to be working on.
There you have it. That's what racism is, and just like he said, and that's what people use that. A lot of people don't know what that definition of racism is. They don't. You know, we've been using it. I heard other black people say, you know, you being racist. How can you be racist? How can you be racist to somebody when you don't have the economic wealth? And this is a man that studied, you know, being in politics. So he sees legislate from presidents and things come across across the board. So I wanted to chime in on that. So when people use that, that was the one video I want to point out. The other video is basically some black people that use the N word. They're not even aware of. Sometimes we just be using it, and it could sound offensive, but I didn't even know that the N word can be traced back in the Bible, and it was traced back with the people that was one of the men that walked with Paul, that came out of a different region called Niger, and he would be gets called nigger, but because he, so this is where they probably got the terminology in America, nigger, you know, but they use it in a derogatory way. But that was showing you it came from an actual people. So yeah, and I used to think it was kind of it, and I guess that's where black people use the mindset. Well, it all who governs and who can control it. But I was, from a white person standpoint of view, I thought about nigger was the way you shiftless, lazy, and you ignorant. That's what their version of it. But the context of nigger is actually the contents of what you seen on the video. Uh, what Pastor Kelly said on his page on Week Woke, and then I put down the definition of what racism really is when we go through something like that, because a lot of people don't know that, and yet if you want to know who this is what his this came from a website, but that's Dr. Claude Anderson. I don't know how to kind of so that's Dr. Claude Anderson, but yeah, he's breaking down, and that's true. You can't. There's three definitions. Basically, what in this video, I'm using definitions how people throw loosely definition. What his definition is right between discrimination, racism, and bigotry. So that's very true. But we tied on. He said the thing about it's true. Somebody can be biased all they want to. They have a right to be biased, and they have to have prejudice. But it's when they take their prejudice and they execute racism, that's the problem. That's what the issue, what it really is. But I hope, guys, you enjoyed this video. Till next time, I hope it give you an educational lesson, and I hope this has been very intriguing on the definition. This is when it comes to black people and what black people that, but it can be other races too. But this is just an educational word, and just to open up, what's the definition of the two different videos? What do they represent? And definition, reading from the Bible, reading from history, and where they come from. All right, then, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this video. Until next time, this is James. I hope you have a good day out there. So peace out to those, and hope you keep learning and subscribe to my channel, and just put things together to show different points of view on different people's channel, different people's perspective. So all right then, you guys take it easy. Till next time, be blessed.